I wanted to start just by recognizing that we are living in a moment that we weren't living in last Tuesday when we were together. Um, and quite literally and figuratively, the the fires of racial injustice are being stoked in our country, and it's just a very difficult moment. So I want to acknowledge that and make a kavanah, really a blessing over our Torah learning, that it should help us lead lives of tzedek, of righteousness, and help us to be partners with the Holy Blessed One in building a more righteous world. And I also want to dedicate our learning today. One of my rabbinical school classmates pointed out that this is the anniversary of our ordination. So I've been an ordained rabbi now for exactly 7 years. So this feels really great to be learning with all of you on that anniversary today. And also in honor of my classmate's father, Lester Wax, Alav Shalom, who just died recently and whose funeral is today. So we're just holding that family in our hearts. So, Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. Blessed are you, God, who helps us lead holier lives by giving us this mitzvah, this commandment to la'asok b'divrei Torah, to immerse ourselves in Torah study and to challenge us to understand its meaning and to put that meaning into action in our lives. So, so this session, oh, wait, first things first, I want to tie up some loose ends from last week's session, where someone had asked about more examples of edot in Hirsch's breakdown of the Torah. And it's so funny, I wrote them down. I said, oh, I had them written right here, but I had put them onto Avodah. So if we'll remember, Hirsch, and this is also in the packet if you're accessing that, we broke down the Torah into 6 main kinds of Torah: Torot, Mishpatim, Chukim, Mitzvot, Edot, and Avodah. That's ideas about God, laws that make sense, laws that don't make sense, actual mitzvot that we are commanded to do, and edot, which are, in other words, symbolic observances. So Shabbat, holidays, wearing tzitzit, wearing tefillin, putting up a mezuzah, things that are symbols that remind us of Jewish living. I guess another word could be otot. You know, we talk about signs. And avodah, which is the actions that we take to live lives of Torah, which are prayer, blessings, the priestly blessings, not just the one that we know as the priestly blessing, but also the blessings that the priests officiate, and also vows. Someone had asked where vows go. Vows would fall more under avodah than under the edot. So I think that's it from last week. I was so happy to be able to go more in depth with Samson Raphael Hirsch, and I highly recommend. He has a whole book. Oh, I can't remember what it's called. I think it's called Horev, about like more in depth about each of these pieces of Torah. So I highly recommend it. It's really good thought exercise. But this week's learning, the title of this week's session is Human Story in a Human Language. And so we're going to look at what that means. And we're going to look at 2, 3 is kind of ambitious, but I'm an ambitious kind of person. Sources on to figure out what that means. We're going to look at Mordechai Kaplan, who is the father of Reconstructionist Judaism. We're going to look at Art Green, who is my teacher, and I don't know if I would say the father of Neo-Hasidic Judaism. I don't know how you'd feel about that. And Heschel, Abraham Joshua Heschel, who's going to actually take us through some rabbinic texts. So let's jump in with Mordechai Kaplan. Oh, you know what I can't do on my phone is I can't do a screenshot. I can't share my screen. That's a bummer. But you have the...
I can probably do that, Tiferet.
Thank you so much.
Let me upload the doc.
So while we're waiting, I'm just going to tell you a little bit about Kaplan. So Kaplan was America's, what is Neochassidism? Chassidism is the movement of mystical spirituality and mystical practical spirituality that's coming out of like the late 18th, 19th centuries, especially out of Poland. So, you know, when we think about the Baal Shem Tov and Rabbi Nachman and all of those schools of Rebbes, that's like pure Chassidism. Neo-Chassidism is, you know, in that vein, people and teachers who have taken those and found meaning and application in the lives that we lead today. And it's not so much a sense of orthodoxy or orthopraxy as we see with traditional Hasidism, meaning like, you know, keeping Shabbat and all its laws and keeping Kashrut and all its laws, but taking those foundational principles of Hasidism and bringing them forward into the 21st century and making them meaningful in our lives now. There's so many works of, you know, modern works of Neo-Hasidism, and we'll look at one of them today. Did someone just say the Baal Shem Tov is their great-great-great-grandfather? Did I see that?
Yeah, Carolyn.
Oh, wow. That's amazing. That's some yichus.
We've got the screen share going now. I don't know if you can see it.
Perfect. Okay, so we're going to scroll down to the bottom. The text number 3. I'm sorry, I didn't mean all the way to the bottom. Sorry. I think it's text number 4 on that first page. Kaplan with their ancients. The ancients. There it is. Text number 4. Okay. Alrighty. So Kaplan is America's first excommunicated rabbi, which is it's pretty exciting and it's pretty intense. I just want to read a little bit of this excommunication because I think it's important for. Oh, I hear my computer is up. Yay! Let me get out of over here. Oh, great. Sorry. So Kaplan was America's first excommunicated rabbi, which is so funny because being the father of Reconstructionist Judaism, the things that he said at the time are things that aren't, you know, are just things that we take for granted today. And, you know, they've come to shape how we think about Torah, how we think about Israel, how we think about the role of both of those things in the life of the Jew. So in 1945, the headline of the Jewish Telegraphic Agency, the JTA, read Rabbinical Assembly, that's the conservatives, Rabbinic Association, Rabbinical Assembly protests excommunication of Professor Mordechai Kaplan by Orthodox rabbis. Okay, a protest against the excommunication, written in quotes, by the excommunication was done by the Union of Orthodox Rabbis of America and Canada, et cetera, et cetera. We are unanimous in voicing, this is fast forward, we're unanimous in voicing our condemnation of the hysterical step taken by the Union of Orthodox Rabbis, the action of burning a book of prayer, drawn in large measure from the pages of scripture of the entire range of Jewish sources and sacred literature, nor does it increase the respect for the Orthodox Union. And then it concludes with, we assure the public at large that the action of the, this is not the article I was reading before. Oh, here. Here we go. The attempt to regiment the religious thinking and behavior of Jews by methods of suppression, which all civilized humanity has outgrown, is contrary to the spirit of Judaism, even as it is repulsive to all right-thinking people. So I read these really strong words, and I remember thinking like, wow, this is right when I was starting to learn about Kaplan. Like, oh my gosh, what did he do? What did he say? So in thinking about Torah, first thing, Kaplan is not a Bible scholar. He's just a learned, he was an Orthodox Jew at the time, learned person. And these are his thoughts and how he felt. So he wrote text number 4. The ancients, with their limited knowledge, could not regard their inner drives as subjective experience. Whatever inner force was beyond their control was to them as much of an objective and external fact as the things they saw around them. Like the external world, the irresistible inner promptings of the heart or the will could not, they thought, come from some deity. And that's from his work, Torah and Salvation. So I just realized my... So what is this saying? I guess Torah is an attempt to reify feelings, right? That we have all of these feelings about the way things should be, and the ancients, the people who received the Torah first, who wrote the Torah, depending on how you come down on that, were unable to say that we're just human beings who have these feelings, we have these drives, we have these impulses, and that's just within every single human being. But what they had to do is say it must be from something outside of ourselves, and it had from specifically some deity. So, in reading that, I'm like, oh yeah, I can see why some people would burn his books. That's a pretty radical notion. But then when we think about what we say today, it's not so different. And we're going to look at it in a moment at what art is saying and how that is kind of it's built off of Kaplan's thought here. So some of the examples that he points to for this sort of mindset is looking at God's disappointment in creation, right? And especially with the Noah story, the story in the garden, and how that is a projection of the people Israel's despair, like people Israel, not in a biblical sense, but like the people who are a part, the Israelites who are a part of birthing the Torah, it's a reaction to our despair over human decency in the world and our tendency to spoil creation in all its forms, which we are continuing to see today. Or the story of Jacob wrestling with the angel, how that is a projection of the people Israel's feeling of needing to struggle with what's right and wrong and struggling with karma and how our actions come back to us. So instead of, saying as we would say now, or even then when Kaplan was writing in his, social, what's the word? Call it a social theology. Instead of saying we deal with our past as it comes back to us, the language of the Torah says, well, Jacob was wrestling with an angel, with God, and he had this realization, et cetera, and it's posited as him and God instead of him in his quiet moments by himself. So essentially, in this moment, he's talking about making these abstract concepts concrete in the Torah. In text 5, he continues to say, divine is therefore whatever possesses the quality of perfecting man or humanity's perfection or salvation. So Torah-like, in quotes, my quotes, is whatever possesses the quality of rendering the Jewish people aware of its function to further the process of humanity's perfection or salvation. Israel-like, again my quotes, is the people that identifies itself with that process. And I can see why that seems incredibly heretical at the time. And even today, for some, that would be incredibly heretical. And that's to say that Torah is anything that helps the Jewish people connect with its function of bettering the world and doing tikkun olam, right? And even in our most, our older texts, I'm trying to think if it's in somewhere in our texts, it says that anyone who says something like Torah is anything other than Torah as we understand it, it's heresy. So we have that written right here. And to say that Israel are the people that identifies itself with this process, well, while it does say Jewish people in the sentence above, it doesn't have to be. It could be people who are struggling with, as the root of the word itself is, struggling with this process of coming to salvation and coming to the perfection of humanity's creation. So it's a much more global way of understanding it. And these two texts come together in the next text, which is basically a summary of Kaplan's perspective on the Torah by Mel Schult, who is like the foremost authority on Mordechai Kaplan's life and his thinkings and his teachings. So he writes, Israel has been selected to live according to God's will, which is the rule of law and justice. Those who live by force and aggression will perish. The belief that right must triumph over might is established for the Hebrews by seeing these principles actually operative in their proto-history. Humanity suffers because of its pride and its arrogance. The Torah comes into the world in order to offer humanity the opportunity to reclaim itself. Humanity can recover its original state of perfection and movement towards this goal initiated by God through the Torah and Israel. So this is saying that Torah itself is a guide for human living, simply, right? And it's if we read this with the understanding of the semantic shifts that he made in the other two texts, that God is that notion inside of us that's sending us in the right direction, our intuitive goodwill, the intuition to do right things. That's the driving force of this change. The Torah comes into the world to offer humanity the opportunity to reclaim itself, and Torah-like being any of that wisdom that's going to drive us in a direction to better ourselves. That is the goal of the project of Torah. So I absolutely understand why these things were shocking and radical at the time. Now, jumping forward to the text from Rabbi Arthur Green from his book Ehyeh, this is the chapter Torah, Creation's Truth Revealed. Now, Art is not saying anything that different from what Kaplan said. In fact, they line up quite nicely. But the way that he's saying it is a much more holistic way of looking at and understanding how Torah operates in the way that Kaplan wrote about. Would he still be excommunicated probably if he was writing this back then? Absolutely. But for now, for us, it's a much more, I think it's more gentler language on our hearts. So it reads, knowing and loving the universe, whether through understanding the minute organisms studied by the microbiologist or the vast spaces traversed in the mind of the astronomer, is part of our way to knowing and loving God, right? That's talking now an expansive view of Torah, or what Kaplan called Torah-like. Torah, or theology, is in this sense a macro science, a broad framework through which to find meaning in the whole of human endeavor, including the sciences. The mystical religious mind is in no way opposed to science, but rather seeks to encompass it. The Zohar's words, "There is nothing that is not referred to in Torah," should not be taken as a reason to narrow our perspective, limiting study to nothing but Torah itself. Just the opposite. It should mean that Torah is the broadest teaching in the universe. All is found within it because all was and is created through it. The laws of physics are Torah. Botany and zoology are Torah. And so too is the study of us human creatures and the social forms we've evolved. Thus, anthropology, psychology, sociology, and all the rest are to be seen as part of Torah. The internal, quote, secular nature of these disciplines does not diminish their ultimate religious meaning. All that deepens and enriches our appreciation of God's world is Torah, the roadmap for our journey back to God. It is through the many masks of God that we will come to catch a glimpse of the single face that lies behind them all. So beautiful. And Torah writ large, how we encompass, how we welcome Torah into every aspect of our life. And let's see, that's not very different from what Kaplan was saying, right? Anything that's Torah-like is what's helping us on our mission, right? And this is, Art's text is a lot more focused on God, though, I would say, right? Like the Kaplan saying that Torah is about leading us to a better life. Art is saying that Torah is about helping us to connect with the God that exists in our lives and all around us, and how we also incorporate that into ourselves in order to do the work of creation and partnering for creation. Let's see. So in this, I'm not going to read this whole next paragraph, but it's just learned out a little bit more in that how did Abraham know how to keep all of Torah before Torah was given, right? We're way before Sinai. And that because Abraham in our Midrash is said to have kept all of Torah, it speaks to this notion that we have of an internal Torah that goes back to that subjective experience, right? That we know what is right. We know the paths that we're supposed to take. And it requires us to take the time to actually tap in to the internal Torah, to our notions of God and the operations of the world. Okay, so let's jump to this third paragraph where we talk about the Sfat Emet. But the later Hasidic masters in Poland went a step further. The Sfat Emet, a 19th century Kabbalist. I see, honey, hello. That's amazing. I am teaching right now. Can you go in the other room, darling, and close the door? Thank you. It's God. God just came into the room. It's so amazing. That the later Hasidic masters in Poland went a step further. The Sfat Emet, a 19th century Kabbalist, claims that Abraham's deeds became Torah, as did the deeds of the other patriarchs in the tribes of Israel. And the primordial Torah is beyond language. It's nothing but the mysterious name of God, unutterable and beyond comprehension. Like, wow, their deeds became Torah. These are our ancestors in whose image we're created, we hold on to. So that means that if their deeds can become Torah, our deeds can become Torah, right? And this is the notion of this primordial Torah that we can then be, not primordial, excuse me, this inner Torah, that we then become Torah Chaim. We can become living Torah by being able to tap into this, the Torah that lives within us. Back in the text, in order to be received by humans, however, Torah, as we think of like the Torah scroll, had to be clothed in human deeds. God chose Abraham and his descendants not to be the passive recipients of Torah, but to be those whose lives and actions would be used to embody the hidden Torah. And that is so important for how we think about the stories that we read in Torah. I think we make, you can say hi at the end, sweetie. We sometimes make the mistake of putting Torah on a pedestal and saying, oh yeah, it's so holy, it's so holy. We can't criticize, it is what it is. But the Torah, as it's laid out right here, is given to us to show us the imperfection of our ancestors, the imperfection of the nature of people. And I was talking in a class last night and we spent an hour and a half just working on the relationship between Abraham and Isaac, and looking at what we learn from their imperfections and how do we take out of that, and how do we live the Torah from those interactions that we are learning. So yes, the Torah is a human story in human language. So more about that human language when we go to the next page, which is at the top. It says 2 approaches to Torah exegesis. Talia, please no. Thank you. Talia, you can say hi a little later, sweetie. So this is from Abraham Joshua Heschel's book, Heavenly Torah, which is a tome. It's a massive book that seeks to answer all kinds of questions about the nature of Torah, taken from Jewish tradition across all of Jewish sacred text. It's an amazing work. So, okay, Kalia, you got to take those in the other room, sweetie. Please take them in the other room and close the door. So, at the top, it says basically what we've been saying. Oh, I'm sorry, the copy is not so good. I'm trying to figure out how to copy it best. I'll read. Even in places where synonyms appear in the Torah, it is not intended as a substantive addition or for any specific purpose. For example, we read, he shall abstain from wine and any other intoxicant. Now, are not wine and intoxicant one and the same? Yes, the Torah simply uses 2 synonymous terms. In short, the Torah speaks in human language. So, you know, this is another reminder that when we're looking into Torah, it's talking in human language. It's meant to speak to us. So we do come across all of these instances where things seem to repeat or words are a little different. And we spend so much time and effort working to understand those differences and to say like, well, is it just this difference? Is it just this word that means something different? Or does this change the entire nature of how we think about whatever is being written here? Perfect example. In the 10 Commandments, Shamor v'Zachor. In one repetition of the 10 Commandments, it says Shamor et Yom HaShabbat. In the second, it says Zachor et Yom HaShabbat, that we should keep it and we should remember it. So which is it? How does that change? And we've looked at both the nature of those 2 words separately, and we've looked at how that changes the commandment. Okay, so further on here, Rabbi Ishmael is saying, Rabbi Ishmael versus Rabbi Akiva, one thinks, yeah, it doesn't matter at all. Hold on one second. Oh, yeah. I can't hear myself think, sweetie pie. Rabbi Ishmael thinks it's all about simplicity. Rabbi Akiva says, absolutely not. We have to look at what the meaning of the words are and why these changes are. You know, essentially because God is God and God could have used any word. So if God changed the word, obviously it has a meaning. 2 very different examples. And you'll see at the bottom a beautiful, I'm going to just read this because I think it's worth it to read. Once he argued with Rabbi Akiva, here we are, Rabbi Ishmael and Rabbi Akiva, who, as noted above, interpreted the particle et to signify some substantive addition, right? So we're looking as follows. The text does not read, when God began to create the heavens, Hashemayim, and the earth, Haaretz, but rather the heaven et Hashemayim and the earth, the et Haaretz. But this is simply the natural style of the text. That's what Rabbi Ishmael would say. That's basic Hebrew. So that's all it is. Rabbi Akiva says, no. This is not a trifling thing for you. And if it is trifling, it is so from you. Eek, that he's throwing shade at Rabbi Ishmael. But he says, Et Hashemayim is meant to add the sun, the moon, and the constellations, and Et Haaretz is meant to add the trees, grasses, and the Garden of Eden. In order to say et, in order to say that et is the aleph to taf of it, right? The all-encompassing, because et is just made up of aleph to taf, just, you know, those 2 letters. But in Hebrew, when we say the aleph to taf, it's everything, it's the whole. So it's meant that et is of supreme importance. If it weren't there, it wouldn't include everything that was created. So, you know, we take our pick. But, you know, and so in summary, the Torah is a human story written in human language. And we get to explore this. And most importantly for us is in our exploration and in our lives, we get to be a part of this process through Torah study, Torah of the text. We become Torah Sheba'al Peh. Our mouths become the vehicle for the oral Torah. We land in this conversation, which has been going on for millennia, which is our heritage. And we get to act, to live Torah through our lives as they are dictated by how we understand God, how we understand Torah, how we understand Torah with a capital T and versus a small t, and how we understand that feeling inside of us, which I call God, which some of us call, substantive natures, better instincts, what have you. And that is the project of Torah according to these three teachers today. So I think we have a little time for questions and hopefully answers, or maybe just questions.
So if folks have questions, you can put it in the chat box, or you can use the raise hand function in the participant box to let me know that you want to be unmuted. I can't actually see all of the screens, though you could try going like this. I may or may not see you. Or we can read your questions from the chat box. Carol.
Very good. Thank you, Julie. I say very good because not everybody gets my name right with that spelling. Can I print out any of the text? Is there a way to do that? Any of the texts that Rabbi just showed us on screen?
If you go to the link that I think Julie put it in again, if you click that link, it'll take you to the text, and in your computer, you'll have the ability to download it and print it out.
Lovely, lovely. Thank you.
Sure.
I'm unmuted. A couple of questions in the chat box. So Shauna's asking about Kaplan. Was Kaplan's position on Torah that it's simply a great masterpiece of human effort, somehow understanding the best ways for humans to live and not divinely inspired?
And not divinely inspired. I'd say, so the first part of that is absolutely true. I'm not sure about the divine inspiration. And I don't know if that is Kaplan's belief. That's certainly the belief of like the modern Reconstructionist. I'm not sure if that is Kaplan's belief or not.
And then another related question, did Kaplan believe in God?
That's a great question. Well, I mean, I guess the question is, God, how? Like there are different notions of God. So if it's like, did Kaplan believe in like God as a punishing person or something like that? I don't think so. I think it's more like he says here, that feeling within us, that guidance, that leadership within us that we all have is what is called God.
Any other questions or comments?
I think Carol has another comment.
Carol, go ahead. You can unmute yourself.
Hi. My husband had many books by Mordechai Kaplan. He was a great fan of his. And I did dip into them occasionally myself. But wasn't Kaplan's belief that God was manifested through the interaction between people, that was where God existed? I guess like Buber's I and thou.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
That's it.
Yeah, I think that's true. And I think that comes back to be living Torah and bringing that into the world through our actions. Yeah.
And perhaps related to that, Max comments, would it be possible to say that because we are made in the image of God, the human story, that is the Torah, is also the divine story, divinely inspired?
100%. I think that's true. You know, we say in the, you know, the mystical world that we are, you know, God's expression of God's self seeking to understand God's self, right? If we're all part of the one, right? So all that we're living out is God trying to be in relationship with God's self and to understand God's own nature. So I think absolutely that's true.